And when I visited him at his shoreboard restaurant in Half Moon Bay, and for those of you that don't know, the Shorebird, it ran for over 23 years and was one of the most successful restaurants around and most profitable restaurants around, which we'll discuss with you shortly. And I was just starting out in restaurant brokerage, and for some reason, I had heard that he may have some inkling about selling or wanted a valuation, and so that's how we connected. And I had the opportunity of meeting him then. So something just briefly about Bill, and then Bill will go in more depth about his background. After an officer training commission and flight training in the United States Navy, Bill earned his BS in economics from Oregon State University in 1970, where he was a 3-year Pac-8 Conference halfback and a draft choice for the legendary Pittsburgh Steelers. Bill has more than 40 years of food service, hospitality, and retail experience. He developed and owned 3 restaurants during his career, most notably the Shorebird, which I just mentioned, in Half Moon Bay. Bill has been very active in the industry. He's been involved in the California Restaurant Association for 20 years, and he actually served as its president in 1996 and 1997. He's also past chairman of the California Restaurant Association Education Foundation. So Bill will expand on his background in just a brief minute, but just a little administrative thing. If you have questions, and we welcome questions, please go to the question bar and just type in your question, and time allowing, I will respond. Bill and I will respond. So we would like your participation if you're so interested. So Bill, with no further ado, please introduce yourself maybe more in depth than what I just covered. Thanks for joining us, too.
Pleasure to be here, Steve. Great respect for you and all the work you've done. I think you and I were kindred spirits from the time we met. I've always, in my background, that was probably most notable was the fact that I played football at a fairly high level. And I realized very early that football and restaurants were very similar. The front of the house, the back of the house, the offense, the defense, the offensive line, the defensive line, et cetera. And so I realized at that early stage that it was about team building, because we have a lot of very capable people in the industry that are out there, but you got to find them. And then what football brought to me also was structure. We operated at a high level in terms of our commitment to the sport. We were on scholarship, and in those days, nobody had any money. So a scholarship was something that was really, really important. And Oregon State was a great team and a great program, and I was really honored to be there. So I learned, through football that a lot of these football disciplines really translated very well into the restaurant business. And so when I started out early on with the Shorebird, I actually went to Alaska first, and I spent a year in Alaska at a hotel up there running the food and beverage operation. And it was, nobody knew anything. And in Alaska, believe me, there's no people. So you got to winging it as part of the program. And we were very successful. I was very successful in the Alaska situation. Came back, took over the Shorebird, which was a turnaround at that point in time. And the owners hired me to come in from the outside, and I took it over, brought in my partner, Nick Dunn, who was a longtime friend and partner. And we turned it around, and it took about 3 years. But we basically instilled systems and guidelines and protocols and disciplines. And, we took running it as a business, not running it as a restaurant. And that led me to a lot of people really admiring what I'd done at the Shorebird. That led me to the California Restaurant Association being president. And that led me to a lot of contacts as president of the CRA with a lot of accomplished operators. And of course, you get 25, 30, 40 accomplished operators. They all know other operators, and it didn't take long for problems to come my way. And I realized at that point, there's a consultancy in the next phase of my life. And at the time I was doing quite a bit of professional speaking to the industry with the National Restaurant Association and many distributors. I did a lot of distributor work and manufacturer work because I was a restaurateur, and the manufacturers and the distributors wanted to know, okay, how does the restaurateur feel about A, B, C, or D? So that's a quick overview. And then once I finally sold my last restaurant, it was a natural evolution for me into consulting through the speaking that I was doing. And at that point, I really zeroed in on profitability as sort of my stick, if you will. And from profitability came turnarounds. And over the last 20 plus years, I've really specialized in turnarounds in situations that are both large volume independents or emerging chains. I like 3 to 5 units, and that took me into the franchising world. And I did a decent amount of franchising work, because what we all know is that franchising is about discipline and doing things a certain way and not negotiating accordingly. So and then in the last really 5 years, I've specialized in expert witness work. And I know you've done that too, Steve. And there's plenty of problems out there in the legal community with lawsuits, both plaintiff and defense, relating to needing expert witnesses who can actually, my distinction as an expert witness in restaurant and food service cases is that I've actually done it. I'm not an academic from Cal Poly Pomona or the University of San Francisco or Cornell. I'm a actual restaurateur that can talk the talk and walk the walk. And in certain cases, that's a big deal in terms of being able to look at the jury and say, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I've actually done this work. I'm not an academic. I'm a practical, experienced operator. And that's served me well with over 40 cases as an expert witness.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I do the same when I do my expert witness stuff. I relate to my real life experience as an owner operator and as a landlord, and then as a broker. So I got the 3 different perspectives. But the most important one, as you mentioned, is actually been there, done it, and
yes,
you can relate to the real life situation at hand. So very well said. So in your highly specialized area of consulting, how would you describe what you do?
Well, the first step of what I describe what I do is I try to make complicated simple.
Mm-hmm.
And I've said this thousands of times, because as you well know, when you go into troubled situations, and they're often troubled, very much like expert witness cases, but troubled situations, or in the case of restaurants that have been around for a long time, the family's not taking the next stage, going to take over in the next stage. You have to be able to go into them and simplify, which is often political, emotional, family issues. You got to simplify the circumstances. And that typically is a matter of looking at the fundamentals. It always comes back to the fundamentals, which in football was blocking and tackling, and in restaurants, it's cost controls and human resources and marketing and management, the fundamentals of the game that we both learned, Steve, from the inside out. And it's really not that complicated when you really look at it, because essentially you're in the people business. You're not in the restaurant business. If you have the right people that are going to carry out your mission, if you will, you're going to be successful. And I think being proactive is very important. I mean, that's something that I've, been just adamant about in my work, is being proactive. Look for the problem before it's solved. And again, coming back to the fundamentals. I always tell the story about, people come into the restaurant, couples come into the restaurant, and what's the first place a woman goes? They go to the ladies' room. And so we had a ladies' room that was beautiful. And we checked it every 20 minutes, and it was just gorgeous. And that gave the female the positive mindset towards the dining experience that would come. And in my years of consulting, it's just been amazing. And every time I finish, they say, well, the first thing we did was we got that ladies' room squared away. And so again, I think the ladies' room speaks to sort of the simplicity of the business. It is complicated in many ways, but it's also very, very simple.
Yeah, if you break it down, sure. So how do you best describe your process, your consulting process?
Well, initially, I like to talk with the prospect and I want to find out first and foremost, what does success look like to them? What do you want to achieve? You know, in football, it was pretty simple. You want more points on the board at the end of the game than the other guy. In the restaurant business, you've got to, with a prospective client, you've got to say, okay, what is the end state you're looking for? What does success look like? And of course, that sometimes is really simple. You know, I'm 75 years old, I'm tired, I want to sell. Or it may be, well, I'm just tired of dealing with all the management problems and replacing employees, and I'm tired of the government compliance issues, blah, blah, blah. I mean, you got to find out what it is that's driving initially the end game that they're looking for, which in theory is selling.
So how many people do you get involved with that are in a state where they're at the verge of closing the doors, they're being evicted or going bankrupt? Do you deal with those kind of people in any way? And if so, what kind of advice do you give them?
Well, that's a tough question to answer because it all depends on the specifics, obviously. Mm-hmm. If the restaurant is salvageable, and I mean, you know, they're not in bankruptcy, they've got adequate capital, or at least, and it's a matter of how can we change the model to be more successful. Typically, that's a function of sales. Can we fundamentally change the model and do a turnaround towards profitability? Mm-hmm. I'm guessing that's 1 in 5 times. 4 out of the 5 times, they're typically too far gone and there's no hope. And there's really not much I can say to them other than advise them on what their options are. And I always defer to legal counsel on that. Mm-hmm. In my expert witness work, there are all kinds of situations in terms of controversies that go on that I'm well suited to analyze. And most of those are in ongoing operations in some manner, shape, or form.
Got it. So what is your biggest challenge with prospective clients?
The greatest challenge probably is to getting them to think of it as a business, not as a restaurant, and take all the emotions out of it. And then being able to get basic numbers that are an indicator of how well they've operated. And this is your area of expertise also. I mean, you know, if they file tax returns and they're a California corporation, blah, 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 they've got certain obligations. So getting good numbers that I can trust is one of the biggest challenges that I face.
Yeah. What do you do with situations where people don't trust tax returns? Where have you ever dealt with a prospective buyer that questions a tax return? Have you ever gone there?
Many times.
Yeah.
Well, none of us can change the tax system, and we all know what the problem is there relative to the owner-operator in a typical single unit. Yeah. I developed some rules of thumb that I use that I advise on prospective buyers that relate to what is probably really happening behind the scenes based upon what I see in terms of the food, the beverage, the service, the back of the house, the front of the house, what likely is going on outside or beyond as a value added to the actual financials. This is an insidious problem, Steve, as you know. This is really a tough issue. And so I've got a client in LA right now, and he's got just 2 great operations, but you know, he's in a situation where, he's been paying himself above market salaries. And of course, that's still legal with the IRS. But of course, what that did was it reduced his EBITDA and so reduced his value. So there's no easy answer to that one.
Yeah. It's you got to basically recast financials in a prudent manner so that you basically stabilize the expenses that are realistic. Is the food cost what it should be, in the general range, and labor cost, et cetera. So yeah, there are certainly ways of doing that.
And also, Steve, I use the uniform system of accounts for restaurants a lot. And I use the restaurants operations report from the National Restaurant Association. You've seen it, I'm sure. And that gives me perspective by segment, fast casual, full service, white tablecloth, and so forth.
Yeah. Do you find with the new sophisticated POS systems such as Toast, et cetera, that basically creates more accuracy in reporting generally?
If you've got yes, if you've got somebody internally that understands the system, what we've created is a dependence on technology that is relatively sophisticated. And if you've got an old school operator, it's very tough to look at these sophisticated POS systems and understand their capacity, what they're capable of doing.
Yeah, got it. So what is the biggest challenge that you find interacting with clients wanting to sell their restaurant?
I would say the biggest challenge would be understanding what brought them to the point of deciding to sell their restaurant. What was the genesis of activity? So I always say, well, tell me about the last year. What's been going on? Well, last year, sales were down 25%, and all I got to do is I can extrapolate that fairly quickly. Now that has become much more difficult with COVID. And so there's a lot of motivations out there to sell restaurants that aren't dependent upon their performance. It's dependent upon what happened to them during COVID and whether or not they were able to get the subsidies and so forth. So it's almost impossible to do a COVID analysis without specifics relating to what happened with sales and profitability and so forth.
Yeah. What we do generally when we're doing evaluation, I look at use 18, 19, 20. I will either disregard if in fact they were closed for a lot of months and they didn't pivot to takeout and delivery appropriately. And a lot of cases I'll just throw 20 out unless it was a concept that was benefited from COVID. If they were the takeout and delivery oriented prior to COVID. In some cases, they did better actually than pre-COVID. So, but in more cases than not, the people I'm dealing with, 20 was a disaster. We look at 21, 22, and 23 year to date, and we weight those different years. But still, profitability, even if sales levels have come back, profitability levels are not what they were pre-COVID because people haven't been able to offset their increased costs of material, increased costs of labor, and other costs to offset. Even though those increased sales have been offset more, so that the margins are lower. We have found than they were, pre-COVID. So it's tricky. You got to do a lot of analysis paralysis. But there is a big impetus for a lot of people to get out of the business today because they're very frustrated about dealing with realities of today's market. Finding people, dealing with the costs and the fear that interacting with people, you're more conducive to get COVID again. God forbid it's gone, but who knows? So there's a lot of paranoia still for certain people interacting with other people in a work environment really closely, but hopefully we'll get through it. So how do you initially interface with a prospective client? How does that work?
Well, typically I'll get a referral from someone like yourself. Mm-hmm. And I call this sort of the very preliminary. one of the phrases I use a lot is that the client doesn't know what they don't know. They don't know what they don't know. And so typically I interface on the basis of a referral, and I communicate with the prospect a little bit through email, and I set up a call and I say, look, I'm more than happy to spend 30, 45 minutes with you on the call. There's no cost if they come from a reliable referral source. But I'll typically do it anyway because I'm good at it, and I can figure out real fast if I can help them. A lot of times the calls will last 10 minutes and I'll say, no. What you need is X, Y, or Z. You don't need me yet. You might need me later. So it's kind of like I always use the example of being out in the ocean in the middle of the night out in the Atlantic someplace. And the only way that you can figure out is where you are is to look for the North Star. And so I kind of become the North Star initially, say, okay, well, let's take a few minutes and figure out what success looks like for you. What is your end game? Where do you want to go? And a lot of times people are just so caught up in all the problems that are associated with labor and with supply chain and the 6-foot distancing business. I mean, I'll tell you, I spent so much time on that 6-foot distancing thing. I'm sure you did too, just trying to navigate that situation. Mm-hmm. So anyway, I like the style of being able to help people initially. I mean, I want to get clients like anybody else, but I like helping people. And if I can help them and direct them to a third party or somebody else that can help them with their issue. Now, if I can help them, then obviously I'll go into a deeper conversation. But it always still comes back to, what does success look like for you in the next 90 days, 6 months, or a year?
Got it. So what is the biggest problem clients are facing today?
I would say the labor issues, and by labor I mean hourly, with a subset of management. The issues with finding, keeping, and retaining employees has never been more challenging. In the old day, and I've sat in on some interviewing situations with some of my clients, and I'm just really surprised and shocked in a way about the caliber of people that are coming in to work. And really the subset of that is the work ethic. And this is an unfair generalization, but it's my opinion. And I just don't think the labor force out there right now is of the caliber we need to run more intense, more government-oriented, compliance-driven concepts.
Got it. Yeah, that I'm finding the same thing for sure. So,
which leads to, Steve, as a sidebar, which leads to, with me is let's re-engineer what you have. In other words, maybe the people you've got, maybe we can re-engineer the concept a little bit so we don't need as many new people.
Mm-hmm. So what kind of incentives do you find that owners are putting out there to attract new quality employees? Are you seeing any things that are effective tools to attract good new employees?
Well, one that's in the back of the house. One of the areas that I've tried to develop through written job descriptions is job sharing, which is essentially, in my San Francisco restaurant client, we've got 7 people in the kitchen and each one of them can do every job. So rotating to some degree them around different positions helps to the boredom factor. But in going to market to find new employees, it's a matter now of being able to create a job description that offers flexibility in hours.
Mhm.
And we've actually said in one case, we don't care who arrives, who's there. It may be Joe from, shows up at 9 and gets off at 5, but Fred, Sam, or Larry can be there too, because we've cross-trained all these people. And I find that because a lot of hourly workers in the back of the house are working 2 jobs or 3 jobs.
Sure.
And so so giving them that flexibility, which is another way of saying, we trust you. We trust you to make sure that somebody is here, and then giving them the tools and training to be there. The front of the house is a little bit different, because obviously the service side, the tip, once you put tipping into the mix, Steve, as you know, it changes everything. So cross-training the people in the front of the house to do, in one of the restaurants we did, each of the servers had to do one shift as a hostess or hostess, because we wanted them to understand that part of the deal. And so they cross-train each other, and I've been very gratified to see a lot lower turnover by a more family-oriented, trusting environment.
Are you seeing any of this cross-training occur between back of the house and front of the house? Because obviously, if you get a back of the house into the front of the house, and they get a taste of the tipping, they're not going to want to go back to the back of the house unless you do tip sharing. Are you seeing any of that situation?
I only want to deal with tip sharing. Okay. And that's something that we've put tremendous amounts of work into, because, as you know, the tip is owned completely by the server. So we create a situation that we are a team. We have team meetings with both back of the front of the house, and there's a very good tip sharing model, recommended model. We can't force it legally, but that people are more than happy to contribute to. So what ends up happening typically is that the more skilled position and more capable people in the front of the house, whether they're bartenders or whether they're servers, do make considerably more than everybody else. But everybody else is still getting a share of the tip pool that is adequate for them in terms of their motivation.
Okay, so I'm not really clear. Is it illegal to have a formalized tip sharing program instituted in a restaurant?
You can have a verified tip sharing program, and I don't want to practice law here, Steve.
Okay.
We studied this in some detail. As long as it's voluntary. Now, if you have one server that doesn't want to play, doesn't want to agree, then the whole thing essentially is over.
I see. Because
you can't force that tip, at least it is owned 100% by the server.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, what we have found that works for us, I'm also involved in a hotel operation, and to attract good people in a tough labor market, is that we offer referral fees to existing employees. And so if they refer us an employee and they come and work with us, we will give them X amount of dollars, and then we will, if they stay for 3 months, 6 months, a year, we will give them additional amounts of money. So it's sort of like it's a referral fee, so to speak.
Yes.
Yeah, and that seems to work well. And I've talked to a number of restaurant clients that use a similar model. So it's something that seems to be somewhat effective. And obviously, you only want to get referrals from those employees that are doing a good job, not doing a mediocre or a bad job, for sure.
Well, the biggest factor there, Steve, are the compliance issues. San Francisco is a place unlike any other, so you got to be very careful. I've done what we're talking about, and we just use it. We call them spontaneous bonuses, essentially. Yeah. And that gives us total flexibility. If we want to give somebody a bonus because they, have shown up for work right on time for the last 7 shifts, we're allowed to do that, as long as essentially, we stay away from all the compliance issues.
Sure. Got it. All right. So here's my next question for you. What are the major things you've learned from the restaurant business that have served you well in your consulting activity? You sort of alluded to this to some extent, but maybe you could elaborate, how specifically your past restaurant experience serves you well in what you do now.
Well, first and foremost, it's discipline. And that goes back to football in many respects. It's the discipline. And restaurateurs oftentimes are in the restaurant business because they don't want to be disciplined. So you got to have a disciplined approach to what you do. I think, again, keeping it simple, being on time, always being on time. What I call the Lombardi rule, Vince Lombardi of the Green Bay Packers, if they used to have meetings and if the meeting was set at 4 p.m., if at 3:50 they locked the door. That's a true story. They locked the door because everybody was supposed to be on Lombardi time. So these guys would be out in the hall half an hour before the meeting, so they wouldn't be late.
Wow.
It comes back to again, I think to the fundamentals. And what was the second part of your question?
Yeah. What things have served you well? I mean, you mentioned earlier knowing the jobs of everyone that you're interacting with, front of the house, back of the house. I think that from my experience, that was very important. To basically, if somebody doesn't show up and you can't get a replacement, you should be in a position to jump in there and if necessary, wash dishes, cook, host, serve, whatever. At least that was the old school mentality. I don't know how well that prevails today, but I think it's very important. And you have more empathy and understanding all the trials and tribulations that each craft has, having actually done that job yourself. In fact, before my father would let me wash dishes when I was 15 in San Francisco, they said, irrespective of whether you're a family member or not, you have to have a work permit. And to get a work permit, you got to be 15 years old. So I couldn't start working. And so my father said, okay. When I was 13, I wanted to go to a Boy Scout jamboree, and it cost a couple $100s. At that time, that was a lot of money. He said, hey, son, I think it'd be a good idea if you earn that money yourself. I said, what? Where am I going to get a job at 13? He said, oh, no problem. Your cousin David has a gas station. I'm sure you can help him there on the weekends and holidays, whatever, and earn some money. And so I did that for a year. And so cleaning lube rooms and filling gas. And actually, when I turned 15, it was great to come into a restaurant, have a roof over my head, eat what I wanted to do, interact with customers. And I really appreciated washing dishes and cleaning toilets. So the empathy factor is very important, I think, to be an effective owner and dealing with, especially, all these lower craft positions, washing dishes, bussing, cleaning, et cetera. It's important to have a good working knowledge, I think, of every craft, for sure.
Well, in the full service segment, the dishwasher is a huge part of the whole business model, as you know. And going in and washing dishes initially changes everything in terms of the culture.
Yeah.
And being on the floor, bussing tables as the owner sends a tremendously powerful message to everybody in the staff. And we had a rule also when I had the Shorebird for those years is Nick and my partner and I, we cooked brunch, Sunday brunch.
Yeah.
And we wanted everybody in the kitchen to see us in there being able to do it. And so we had virtually no turnover over a period of many, many years.
Yeah, that's great. So you alluded to this a little bit earlier, but again, maybe you can elaborate it. Could you tell us about your football career? And again, what were the major things you learned that help you navigate the future?
Well, first and foremost, I would say Lombardi time, meetings, being on time, being 10 minutes early all the time, in all circumstances. The relationship between the lineman and the so-called skill positions, that was probably for me the biggest wake-up call. And I understood it coming out of high school, but when I got to college, it wasn't very hard to figure out when you're at a Pac-10 level, 12 level Division I. You may be a great running back in high school, but you're going nowhere unless those guys between the tackles produce for you and give you running room. And so cultivating the offensive line, which really I was cultivating the back of the house at that time. I didn't know it, but it's the unglamorous, unexciting. Nobody's ever heard of you. You're toiling under conditions where there isn't any glory. That would to me was a very, very consistent theme in our restaurants. And as I said, being able to do every job in the place. I mean, when I was in college, even at Oregon State, one of our offensive coaches, I mean, he was probably in his early 30s, and he actually showed us how to do it, actually showed us how to make certain moves and so forth. So I think that's also important. A restaurant is a team. And if it executes all the team and makes the customers happy, they will come back. And in a sense, teamwork is marketing.
Right. Yeah. And to carry forward with that, you have a great football video on your website. It's titled Breakthrough, and it has 5 steps. The first step is vision. Could you tell us, what each of these steps mean to you? Vision, planning, belief, teamwork, and feedback. So would it be possible to share, what your view is on each of those? Vision. I think you start out, if you know where you're going, once you get there, when you get there, you'll be lost. Yogi Bear.
Yeah. Yogi was my
where I can help. I can help here. Okay, so vision was the first one.
Yes.
And use that Yogi Bear.
If you don't know where you're going, when you get there, you'll be lost.
Exactly. And in planning, what are the main things?
Points of planning from football, it came planning. We spent so much time in meetings planning what we were going to do that I really picked up in the planning side of it, the critical importance of being proactive in planning and planning for everything. I remember we had when I was playing, we had before the game, 2 hours before the game, the equipment guy would come in and he'd give everybody new shoelaces for their cleats because he didn't want anybody to have a breakdown on the field. And, so that to me was always part of the planning aspect.
Right. And now your third point on belief about hiring, you refer to them as EEs and managers. What's your thinking there?
Well, being totally unafraid to find and interview and recruit and train the people that believe in your system, that are truly committed to the way you want it done. And there's 100 ways to do things on a floor of a restaurant, as you well know. And so belief, and another part of that is, I think, probably trust too.
Right. And then teamwork you mentioned earlier, but that's obviously a very important point in terms of everyone working together. And feedback, what you're thinking on feedback? Well,
feedback is the breakfast of champions. I think one thing I did that was really remarkable, and I can't even believe I did it, but I did, was that I would build little small guest comment card pieces of paper. And I would, if I had questions about certain things relating to the business, like should we open half an hour earlier, or and there was a bunch of issues that always come up in management. I would ask my employees, and I can remember putting the little 3x5 cards into their slots, and they would write down their comments. I would ask their opinions on situations and circumstances that related to decisions we were making for the greater good. And so in a way, it's like they were like an extended board of directors, if you will. Now, we didn't do it for everything, but anytime we had management meetings and we weren't sure, I said, let's ask the employees what they think. And there is no single thing you can say to somebody that has greater value than I'd like your opinion.
Absolutely. And they're in the trenches and they know they get the exact feedback from the customer's mouth.
Yes,
And
sir.
the customer is the boss. I mean,
And we avoided some disastrous decisions too.
Yeah.
In that regard, because they are the closest to the customer.
Yes.
And one of them was one of the employees. One time we said, how can we better serve the guest entry in the at the restaurant, the guest entry. And one of our employees says, clean up the parking lot. And I thought, wow, that's pretty interesting. So, we were just thinking about the restaurant, but well, we went out in the parking lot and what do you think we found? People dumping stuff on the, so that was a direct expression of opinion from an employee that I would have never thought of.
Yeah, no, the first impressions are very important. In fact, when I talk to a seller and, in terms of prepping them to put their restaurant on the market, I always tell them, make sure the restaurant is always clean, as it should be anyway, even before putting it on the market, but especially now, make sure all the equipment works. There's no deferred maintenance. Everything looks good and has curb appeal, because a lot of buyers, they'll get turned off if they're buying a going concern. They're going to totally gut the place and just they're buying the infrastructure and the location and the lease. They're not as concerned about all the particulars. But if they're buying a going concern, they want to maintain the concept. They're very concerned about, how it looks and how it's executed, et cetera. So first impressions are very important.
Well, we call it staging, but look at the residential real estate world.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah,
I mean,
they tens of thousands to stage a house.
Staging it, and it's exactly the same. It's a value perception issue.
Yeah,
and but it's not much fun to do.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. Except you can't formally stage a restaurant if it's a confidential sale, right?
Well, but you can go in, and this is part of what I do in my work. When I get to a point where I see a situation that might evolve into a referral to you, I can start on a lot of that.
Yeah,
I can, because I'm an intermediary in a way. Yeah. And say, well, before you list this, here's some things we need to do.
Yeah,
and that's been very helpful for me.
For sure. So another question for you. What are the major reasons why so many restaurants fail in the business today? And what are some suggestions you have to minimize failure?
Well, the biggest reasons restaurants fail today is because they don't, and this is either a long answer or a short answer. The short answer, the reason so many restaurants fail today is because they don't run them like businesses, in my opinion. Running a business means discipline, and an awful lot of people believe, and I won't overgeneralize here, that the restaurant business is a little bit like show business. This is going to be fun. This is going to be exciting. All my friends are going to come and see me. I'm a restaurateur, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the truth of it is that it's not a particularly glamorous business. It's a nuts and bolts business. And so I'd say first and foremost, run it like a business and look at human resources and operations and management and
cash flow.
Well, cash flow, all the buzzwords, all of them.
Yeah.
And, I do an audit. I do a 18-page audit that I give to the operator before I even go in there. And I say, okay, check yes or no on these things. And I got a third box that's no opinion. And, you know, once they start looking at a 6, 7, 8 page audit form and they start to fill it out, they realize that this is a fairly complicated business we're in from that standpoint. And all these moving parts should be part of what I call best practices. And 2 out of 3 people that I send the audit to, they don't even want to do it. They say, we don't do any of this. And I go, well, okay, then you've got a blueprint, don't you? You got a map for the future. Do some of this stuff and I'll help you. And call me back in 6 months.
Yeah. Yeah. Having systems and in place for every craft, I think is important, and making sure they're executed consistently is very important. There are many more things, Bill, you and I could discuss for hours, but I think, you know, you've hit on a lot of salient points, and I think that it's important to let the audience know if they want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
The best way is just to email me. And just ideally refer this video that we've done, and I will help them. I've had many conversations, as you have too. I give very, very generously of my time if I feel that the circumstances warrant it, and that comes from people that are sincere and professional and rational in what they're doing, not just out there surfing the internet trying to find an easy way to do something. It's a matter of just email me with an initial question. I typically set up a time, set up a half an hour, and they call me and I'm ready, and I turn off all my distractions and I go through the process. What made you call me, etc.
Can you give the audience your email address?
Yes, it's Bill Main, one word, BILLMAIN, Bill Main, 41, the digits 41 at Gmail.
Okay, thank you. You want to give a phone number too, or just email?
Phone number is okay for text initially, 530-521-6100, but they've got to text first.
Okay, got it.
Because I'm suffering with what everybody's suffering with, which is a bombardment of unknown numbers coming in.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I hear you. No, that's good. Very wise. Thank you.
Email's the best. I do 90% of my work by email.
Yeah.
And then I set up a call like we're having today. I set up a call and we get organized, and I learn a lot about a prospect if they are on time with the call.
Yes. Well, this has been very helpful, Bill. I very much appreciate your input today, and we'll continue looking forward to talking to you and working with you in the ensuing years. As we get older, we get younger in terms of our desires to be more involved in the business. At least that's how I find it. Every day is a new experience interacting with different kinds of personalities and problems. And so that's what gives me a lot of impetus to be very involved in what I do and continue to be involved, hopefully, for many more years.
Well, I'm honored, Steve, I'm honored to be selected to have this call. I really appreciate it. And I have great respect for you. As you know, we've known each other for a long time.
Yeah. Well,
I only want to deal with professionals. And there's a lot of non-professionals in the industry, as you know.
Yes.
And so that's why I'm willing to help.
Well, thank you so much. Just some brief announcements here I'd like to make before we sign off. Our next Dealmaker Show is going to be on Thursday, May 25th, and my co-host will be Michael Karp, who is a former Seller client. We sold Table 24 in Orinda and Forge Pizza in Danville, and he has over 30 years of restaurant bar experience. His experience ranges from restaurants, including celebrities, Hall of Famer Robin Yount of the American Diamondbacks and rock and roll star Alice Cooper. And he's managed A&G food service program with $250 million in sales, and Live Nation's food service program, $300 million in sales. So, and currently Michael owns 4 restaurants, the Fourth Boar in Orinda, Forge Pizza in Oakland and Napa, and Forge Fire Truck and Mobile Pizza business. So we're looking to having him next month. And then in June, we're having Tim Dale, who's also a fast client. He's a nightclub owner. He was a nightclub seller and also bought a wine bar from us. He also was the founder of Yoga Tree, which he sold very profitably. And he's currently the founder director of OM Rising, which is a yoga wellness music festival. So Tim is an outstanding personality and very experienced food and beverage operator. Then in July 13th, we're having a co-host, Laura Van Gallen, who is a former seller client of Phoenix nightclub in San Rafael. And she was formerly president and CEO of Blue Marketing Company, which is a full service marketing company. So we have a lot of very interesting, like Bill, new participants in the Restaurant Dealmaker Show, which we're looking forward to. So I want to thank you all for joining us today. Enjoy spring. It's really nice to go through a weekend and a week without rain. And most importantly, stay well. So again, thanks so much for joining us. And Bill, thank you so much for your very valuable input today. Enjoyed having you.
Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure.